Okay, we're back for another chapter. Are you ready? Yes, yes, yes. My silly friends are here. Hi. Okay. Chapter 8. The Queen's Croquet Ground. A large red rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners busily painting the roses red. Why, they look just like playing cards, thought Alice. This was very strange, and she went closer to watch them. Look out now, 5. Don't splash paint on me like that. I couldn't help it, said 5. 7 bumped my elbow. 7 looked up and said, That's right, 5. Always blame it on others. You'd better not talk, said 5. I heard the Queen say yesterday, you deserve to be beheaded. What for? Said the one who had spoken first. That's none of your business. 2, said 7. Yes, it is his business, said 5, and I'll tell him it was for bringing the cook tulip roots instead of onions. 7 flung down his paintbrush and had just begun, well, of all the unfair things, when his eye suddenly fell upon Alice as she stood watching them. He stopped himself quickly. The others saw her too, and all of them bowed. Would you tell me, please, said Alice, why are you painting the roses? 2 began in a low voice. Well, you see, miss, this should have been a red rose tree, and we put in a white one by mistake. If the Queen found out, she would have our heads cut off. So we're doing our best to... At that moment, 5, who had been looking around the garden, called out, The Queen! The Queen! The 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves flat upon their faces. There was the sound of many footsteps, and Alice looked around to see the Queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs, who also looked like cards, with their hands and feet at the corners. Next came 10 courtiers, decorated all over with diamonds. They walked 2 by 2 as the soldiers did. After these came the royal children with hearts upon their clothing. There were 10 of them. Here's that picture again. The parade for the Queen. And they were jumping along hand in hand. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens, and among them, Alice recognized the White Rabbit. He was smiling at everything that was said and went by without seeing her. Then followed the Knave of Hearts, carrying the king's crown on a red velvet cushion. And last of all, at the end of the grand parade, came the King and Queen of Hearts. Alice wasn't sure if she should lie down on her face like the gardeners. She could not remember a rule about lying down for a parade. And besides, she thought, what's the use of a parade if people have to lie down on their faces? Then they're not able to see the parade. So she stood still where she was. When the parade came to Alice, they all stopped and looked at her. The Queen said, Who is this? Fool, said the Queen, tossing her head and turning to Alice. What is your name, child? My name is Alice, your Majesty, said Alice very politely. Why, they're only a pack of cards. I don't need to be afraid of them. And who are these? Said the Queen, pointing to the 3 gardeners who were lying face down in front of the tree. How should I know, said Alice. It's no business of mine. The queen turned red with anger and screamed, "Off with her head!" "Nonsense," said Alice very loudly, and the queen was silent. The king laid his hand upon the queen's arms and quietly said, "My dear, she's only a child." The queen turned angrily away from the king and said to the knave, "Turn them over." The knave carefully turned the gardeners over with one foot. "Get up," said the queen in a loud voice, and the 3 gardeners jumped up. They began bowing to the king, the queen, the royal children, and everyone else. "Stop that," screamed the queen. "You're making me dizzy." She turned to the rose tree and said, "What have you been doing here?" "Your Majesty," said two, going down on one knee, "we were trying..." "I see," said the queen, who was looking at the roses. "Off with their heads." The royal group left. 3 of the soldiers stay behind to attack the gardeners, who ran to Alice for protection. "You won't be attacked," said Alice, and she put them in a large flower pot. The 3 soldiers wandered around looking for the gardeners. "Are their heads off?" shouted the queen. "Their heads are gone, Your Majesty," the soldiers shouted in reply. Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent and looked at Alice as the question was meant for her. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on then," yelled the queen, and Alice joined the procession. "It's a very nice day," said a voice at her side. It was the White Rabbit. "Very," said Alice. "Where's the Duchess?" "Shh," said the rabbit. He looked over his shoulder and then raised himself up on tiptoe so he could whisper in her ear. "She's been arrested." "What for?" said Alice. "Did you say what a pity?" the rabbit asked. "No, I did not," said Alice. "What for?" "She boxed the queen's ears," the rabbit began. Alice laughed. "Shh," the rabbit whispered. "The queen will hear you. You see, the Duchess was late, and the queen said..." "Get into your places," shouted the queen. People ran in all directions and finally settled down, and the game began. Alice had never seen such strange croquet gowns. There were lots of hills and holes. There were balls and live hedgehogs, and the mallets, the paddles, were live flamingos. The soldiers stood on their hands and feet to make the arches. Alice tried to hold her flamingo still, but it kept twisting around so it could look at Alice. She couldn't help laughing. When she finally got the flamingo to hold still, she looked down and found that the hedgehog had run away. It was a hard and confusing game. The players played at the same time. No one took turns. They argued about everything, and the queen went stomping around screaming, "Off with their heads! Off with their heads!" Alice began to feel uneasy. She had not yet had an argument with the queen, but she knew it could happen at any minute. She started looking around for a way to leave when she noticed a curious appearance in the air. A grin! "It's the Cheshire Cat," she said to herself. "Now I will have somebody to talk to." "How are you doing?" said the cat as soon as there was enough of a mouth for it to speak with. Alice waited till the eyes appeared and then nodded. "There's no use speaking to it till its ears have come," she thought. In another minute, the whole head appeared, and then Alice put down her flamingo. She began to tell the cat about the croquet game. The cat seemed to think his head was enough, and no more of it appeared. I don't think they play fairly, Alice said, and they argue and they don't have any rules, and you have no idea how confusing it is using flamingos and hedgehogs. How do you like the queen? Asked the cat. Not at all, said Alice. She's so... Just then she noticed the queen was close behind her listening. She went on. She's so likely to win that it's not worth finishing the game. The queen smiled and walked by. Whom are you talking to? Said the king, walking up to Alice and looking at the cat's head with curiosity. It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire cat, said Alice. I don't like the looks of it, said the king, but it may kiss my hand if it likes. I'd rather not, the cat remarked. Don't be disrespectful, said the king, and don't look at me like that. He got behind Alice as he spoke. A cat can look at a king, said Alice. I read that in a book somewhere. Well, it must be removed, said the king, and he called the queen. My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed. The queen had one way of settling problems, great or small. Off with his head, she said, without even looking up. I'll get the executioner myself, said the king, and he hurried off. He quickly returned with the executioner, and a crowd began to gather around. An argument between the king and the queen. They were all talking at once. The entire crowd was silent, but very uncomfortable. Alice asked if she could settle the question. They all started speaking to her at once, so she found it very hard to know exactly what they said. The executioner's argument was that you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body to cut it off from. The king's argument was that anything that had a head could be beheaded. The queen's argument was that if something weren't done soon, then she'd have everybody executed. Alice could not think of anything else to say, but the cat belongs to the Duchess. You'd better ask her about it. She's in prison, the queen said to the executioner. Bring her here, and the executioner went off quickly. The cat's head began fading away the moment the executioner was gone. By the time the executioner had come back with the Duchess, the cat had disappeared completely. So the king and the executioner ran wildly up and down looking for the Cheshire cat's head, while the rest of the party went back to the croquet game. Okay, that's that chapter. Mwah!